Brothers and sisters, I'm so happy to be back in Lubbock to share this special day with you. Jay and I and 3 children had arrived here in the summer of 1971 when Lubbock had nearly 150,000 residents. 50th Street ended at Slide Road. The South Plains Mall was almost completed, and Loop 289 was under construction. We discovered a Lubbock First Ward, a newly organized Third Ward, and the Spanish Second Branch. The Plainview branch had been in existence since 1952. The Brownfield branch was about to be dissolved, but was rescued when the Moss family came to town in 1966. Now, this Utah-Baltimore-Denver transplant was struggling to feel like a true Texan when our stake president, Darrell Allred, handed me a brochure titled Pursuit of Excellence. It was the church's achievement program for older members. I scanned the list of suggestions, and when reading Write Your Stake History, the words seemed to jump off the page at me. I quickly closed the brochure with a firm, "Not me, why would I do that?" When I opened the brochure a second time, the very same words jumped off the page. Write Your Stake History. I realized that my life was about to change. Although I would never have chosen such a project, I was now afraid not to choose it, and I went to work. In doing so, I embarked on one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. Right away, I discovered that many of the members who established the church in West Texas were still living and could be located. Some were even in our midst. We had our very own West Texas Mormon pioneers, and they post-dated the Utah pioneers by a mere 77 years. I want to introduce you to some of the earliest pioneers, but first, let's go back to the land before Lubbock. A native Texan, David Walker, has outlined for us that primitive hunters tracked mammoths to a bend in an ancient river where Lubbock pioneers would later build a city. They obviously beat us here. Then the Spanish explorer Coronado passed through a few miles north of Yellow House Canyon in 1541 and described the area as a vast sea of waist-high grass with no distinguishing landmarks. Next to come were buffalo hunters looking for hides, and then cowboys and ranchers with herds of longhorn cattle, and later the English Herefords. Finally, the area boasted of a post office and a store. Lubbock itself was founded eventually as part of a movement westward onto the high plains of Texas. The state offered up virgin land for as low as 10 cents an acre. There were many takers, and 2 settlements emerged. Old Lubbock existed near the south end of the runway of the Lubbock International Airport, and the other, Monterey, was located around 4th Street and Avenue T. The 2 groups agreed to combine into a new settlement with the seat at the site of the present-day courthouse. Legend has it that the flip of a coin determined the permanent name of the town, Lubbock, which was the name of a former Texas Ranger and brother of a governor of Texas during the Civil War. By the year 1900, there were 300 people living in what had been defined as a county, and by Lubbock's incorporation in 1909, the population tallied just under 2,000 individuals. Among those very first citizens were ancestors of a 1974 Lubbock convert, Al Hardin. Brother Hardin's grandparents arrived in 1916 from Comanche on a wagon drawn by a mule team. At the bottom of the caprock, all wagons had to stop until another horse or mule-drawn wagon arrived. so they could double team to get on top of the caprock. Now skip ahead to the city of Lubbock, welcoming its first Latter-day Saints. It was in November of 1924, nearly 100 years ago, that Thomas K. and Annie Jones and their children, Harry Oline, Melvin, and Helen, traveled from north central Texas to Lubbock in search of employment. Unlike the Utah pioneers, there were no covered wagons, no handcarts, no oxen. Rather, the family traveled by caravan after loading the entire clan, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and their children, along with their furniture, onto the back of a large flatbed truck or into one of 3 cars. The Joneses were the only members of the church among the group. Upon arrival in Lubbock, they and their children spent their first night on the South Plains Fairgrounds, either on the ground or in their car under a shed. They quickly settled into their first home, a 10 by 12 foot converted garage on 5th Street and Avenue R. Thomas K.'s father was born in Tennessee, where the family resided, and his mother was an Arkansan who hated Mormons. When she heard there were Mormon missionaries in the area where they lived, she would get her shotgun and sit by the front gate to make sure they didn't come onto her property. She passed away when Thomas K. was only 13 years old. He always wondered why she had berated the Mormons, so he investigated the religion and found that its doctrines were what he had always really believed. He was baptized in 1910 at the age of 17. When the Joneses arrived in Lubbock, there were missionaries, but no LDS church presence. The restored church itself was less than 100 years old and was still based in the Rocky Mountains with a membership of nearly 600,000. Most of the Lubbock residents resided east of Avenue Q and north of 19th Street. There were 3 houses on Broadway, and the little community was nestled among cotton fields with grass-covered prairie beyond. The Jones family never realized that another LDS family had arrived in Lubbock the very next year. George and Mary Tosh and their 3 daughters had found it necessary to move every few weeks to find work. Their contact with the church was through the missionaries who proselytized about once a year where they farmed. After arriving in Lubbock, Brother Tosh helped build what is now the Pioneer Hotel, and Sister Tosh worked for the largest laundry in town. One Saturday afternoon in 1926, she was shopping downtown and heard a man preaching. She knew he had to be a Mormon missionary. She made her way through the crowd, took her place among the listeners, and was overcome with joy. She approached the missionaries and learned they had already met the Joneses. Cottage meetings were arranged for both families, with the Joneses on Avenue A and Tosh's on Avenue M. The organization of the church in Lubbock took a giant step forward in 1927 when Dr. J. Orville Ellsworth was appointed as an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Farm Management in the newly opened Texas Tech College, and his wife Anne became secretary to the president of the college. Brother Ellsworth was a capable and dynamic leader who immediately located all available Mormons, namely the Joneses and the Toshes, and organized the first Lubbock LDS Sunday School. He taught the group in his home on 22nd Street, but soon gained permission to hold class in the district courtroom of the old Lubbock County Courthouse, where members sometimes filled the jury box. The pastor of the First Christian Church on Broadway graciously offered the use of the church's font for the baptism of Harry Oline Jones and Gwen and Myrtle Tosh, the first to take place in Lubbock. Melvin Jones and his sister Helen and Juanita Tosh were all baptized in 1929 in the river at Mackenzie State Park in northeast Lubbock. That same year marked the beginning of the Great Depression. Times were tough for everyone, but Thomas K. managed to purchase a candy kitchen operation in Lubbock for $150. He expanded the business to successfully create peanut brittle and peanut patties that sold for a dime, a nickel, or a penny. Family members went out to the fields to sell candies to workers who included men who worked for the Civilian Conservation Corps in the construction of the Mackenzie Park. Because of his friendship with the manager of the Lubbock Hilton Hotel, Brother Ellsworth was next granted permission to hold Sunday school on the mezzanine of the hotel beginning in 1933. While there, the saints were not allowed to sing hymns because it would disturb the guests. One member stated that they would read the words of the hymns together, pure poetry. Their faith was especially tried on fast Sundays when the scent of freshly baked rolls emanated from the kitchen below. The Lubbock Hilton has been torn down now, so don't look for it. Members increased gradually. Brother Ellsworth's brother, Heber, and his wife, Miriam, added strength to the small group when they arrived to study at Texas Tech. Heber earned $50 a month while a student there. A cotton gin west of Lubbock brought an accountant, Creighton Campbell, his wife Ethelyn, and baby daughter Kay, whose home in 1935 at 2220 28th Street was the last house in southwest Lubbock. They could look towards 34th Street at night and see an occasional car. Actually, 34th Street was considered to be a cow trail at that time. The next new member, Jesse Walker, was born in Scotland, joined the church in England, served as a physical therapist in the British Army in the First World War, and arrived in Lubbock in 1936 with her daughter Afton, just in time for the Dust Bowl days. Sister Walker explained that the dust storms were severe in West Texas at that time. All school children were issued masks. She described one storm that was so fierce it caused the missionaries to run to her home in fear. She placed bed sheets dipped in Lysol water around her four-poster bed and then put the missionaries in her makeshift fort. She stood outside the bed with a mask and a broom with which she swept away the dirt. By 1938, the members sensed the need for a larger place to meet. They moved first to a dance studio on 13th Street and then to another on 19th Street near Lubbock High School, where they had to pay rent and help clean for the first time. So, the early pioneers endured the Great Depression and survived the Dust Bowl days only to face their next challenge, the Second World War, an event that disrupted lives even as it brought more members into West Texas. As the country prepared for war, 125 cadets were housed on the Texas Tech campus, and some were LDS. They were observed marching and singing together, "Shall the youth of Zion falter," as they made their way to the little Sunday school on 19th Street. Harry Olin Jones from the first family became the first missionary to be called from the area. He began his service in England in 1939, but after only 3 months in the country, it became necessary, because of looming unrest in Europe, for him to be reassigned to the Southern States Mission. He eventually enlisted in the Navy, where he spent 4 years flying around the Pacific Ocean in a Douglas R-5D 4-engine plane, delivering mail to the troops during World War II. His brother Melvin enrolled at BYU, but after Pearl Harbor, he enlisted in the Army and was sent to India. Back in Lubbock, airmen flew in and out monthly from the Lubbock Army Airfield. In 1949, that airfield became the Reese Air Force Base, and another group of young officers and cadets was sent there for pilot training. 4 young LDS women found husbands from within that group of future pilots. Membership in the church was bolstered when Henry Miller was hired as the office manager for Armour and Company Meatpacking. He and Grace and their 3 children, Carol, Robert, and Barbara, arrived from Arkansas in 1942. The family lived on Avenue M, where their car sat in the garage because they were not able to get tires for it during the war. They walked every place. It wasn't long before the members found themselves in the finest accommodations to date, the old Rick's Funeral Home that sat on the corner of 13th and Avenue O, where class members sometimes shared viewing rooms with the deceased in their caskets. Next on the church roster was the family of Charles Bird, a rancher in Post. During the drought of the early 30s, he took his cattle to northern Arizona to save them. While there, he met a dark-haired, beautiful young Mormon woman named Vinnie, with whom he fell in love because of the way she could ride the range on her horse. He convinced her to follow him back to Post, where the only range she ever saw was the one in her kitchen, as she raised their 8 wonderful children. Charles resisted joining the church, but he finally did become a member and was eventually called as the 2nd president of the first Lubbock branch. In 1947, Jack and Ruby Bowles became the first who joined after being tracked out by missionaries, and who remained in Lubbock and served faithfully until they passed away. I had the privilege of being Ruby's visiting teacher for 11 years. She and I made a deal that whichever one of us died first would return and give the other one the answers to the questions we still had. I'm still waiting for Ruby. A not yet baptized future branch president named Milton Pierce was stationed at the Kearns military base in the Salt Lake Valley, where he met his wife Lorraine. In 1948, he brought her and their baby Linda to Lubbock, where he could further his work in the grain business. 3 more children arrived in the family: Kenneth, LaRue, and David. Baby Linda grew up and married David Carter. Brother Carter eventually retired from the Army and moved to Lubbock as a widower. He now serves in the Lubbock Temple and is one of the earliest pioneers in our midst. Once again, we can thank Texas Tech for its part in bringing another strong family to Lubbock. Kirk Turner accepted the job with the animal husbandry staff, and he, his wife Fern, and their daughters Judy and Brenda arrived in 1948, 4 months prior to the creation of the North Texas District. Sister Turner thoughtfully placed some photos and documents in a chapel library that have been very helpful in assembling this history. Finally, Dr. Albert Horn, his wife Laura, and children Merrill, Stephen, and Charlotte arrived in 1950, with Russell and Danny being born later in Lubbock. Dr. Horn was called as the branch president of the first Lubbock branch, just in time to oversee the construction of what was the first chapel in the North Texas District. It was lovingly called the Little White Chapel, and it can still be seen at Avenue U and 36th Street. The chapel was built with great sacrifice and effort of all the members and was dedicated in 1953 29 years after the first LDS family arrived in Lubbock. Well, the members no sooner got settled in their new church home before they realized it was too small. Children were sitting in the windowsills. Fortunately, the Ashdown family arrived in 1955 and offered to host the primary children at their home on 23rd Street. Parents would drop their children off at the Ashdowns and would then proceed to the chapel for the rest of the meeting. The children began to say that they attended the Ashdown Church. The first Spanish-speaking members of the church also arrived during the 50s, and a Spanish-speaking branch was organized under the auspices of the Spanish American Mission. A chapel was constructed for their use at 306 North Avenue T, using materials that were prefabricated in Utah, hauled on trucks to the site, and assembled by local members and missionaries and contractors. The Spanish-speaking branch eventually became the Lubbock Second Branch, a part of Lubbock Stake. By the way, Dalia Alcorte, a current member, arrived in Lubbock in 1955 and has remained and served longer than any other Spanish-speaking member. About this time, a decision was made to sell the Little White Chapel and begin planning for a larger meeting house. A small replica of the chapel was created as a bank that could be passed around at church for collecting contributions for the new building. 34 years after the first LDS family arrived in Lubbock, permission was given to construct the chapel on 58th Street that would become the first stake center. The Spanish-speaking branch graciously shared their new chapel with the Lubbock First Branch during the 3 years that were required for construction of the new building. Many stories of opposition and sacrifice accompanied that effort. 2 examples. When the brethren went downtown to secure a building permit, at least 20 citizens went to protest. At least one preacher didn't want the Mormons messing things up in the area. Actually, the property was vacant all around, with a dirt road in front, and there was an unobstructed view of Monterey High School to the north. The church had to promise to provide a parking lot to the east and to plant and maintain the property. Okay? Also, in those days, the membership bore a certain percent of the cost of a new chapel, meaning lots of fundraisers and donations. The members were asked to contribute 1 month's salary for the building, along with untold hours of labor. The dedication of the new stake center in 1961 seemed to open the door to a never-ending series of welcome events and signs of tremendous growth of the Lord's kingdom in West Texas. I want to mention quickly, number 1, our first stake, titled the North Texas Stake in 1967, the 8th stake in Texas, and 446th worldwide, with Frank Gonzalez as president. Number 2, many new wards, including the first for young adults and the Quaker Heights Spanish-speaking branch. Number 3, the addition of chapels on Frankfort Avenue and 114th Street. Number 4, the creation of a second stake with the addition of units from eastern New Mexico. And 5, not least of all, the establishing of the Lubbock Institute of Religion. The Institute had its beginning during the 1969-70 school year, when Texas Tech professors Dr. Lauren Stratton and Rob Larson requested permission to establish an off-campus institute program that offered a religion class and other activities for the young adults. Then in 1971, a chapter of the Latter-day Saints Student Association was welcomed. Those events led to a decision that was made in 1972 by the church education system to establish the first Lubbock Institute of Religion that serves a large territory. Dr. Weston Kitchen became the first director of the Institute. He brought his wife Dorothy and 5 children from Utah, and he worked with the CES to set up every detail related to classes, teachers, schedules, seminaries, and a place for a temporary home for the Institute. He is remembered as a special friend to the students. Dr. Donald Gilchrist followed as the second director, and he brought his wife Dixie and 3 children, Deborah, Carl, and Eric, from his post in Wyoming. He is remembered especially for his endless devotion to education for all ages through the Institute and seminary classes, Friday forums, regional coordinating meetings, as well as implementing many impressive symposiums that featured speakers from BYU, along with CES talent and local stake leaders. Of course, the crowning event for the Saints was the construction of the Lubbock Temple, the 109th in the world, and the accompanying designation of the new Texas Lubbock mission. May I share a few things about the temple? First is our understanding that we were among the first of temples to enjoy a return to extra fine decor after a somewhat austere season. We also benefited from a new plan to place the mechanical equipment at ground level, allowing for high and lofty ceilings. The local temple committee worried about the possibility of trouble associated with the open house, but aside from 2 very minor incidences, the city and the news media welcomed the temple graciously. In addition, Jay and I were called as the president and matron, but were not allowed to tell anyone, even our children, until the call appeared in the church news. That gave us just 3 weeks to get Jay's counselors called, create schedules for the ordinance work, and call and train the necessary workers. It all happened because the Savior, whose house it is, was with all of us every step of the way. Now may I express thanks to the earliest pioneers who were involved in helping to assemble this history. They knew that their stories would appear one day in print. Several of them were able to be present at the time of the dedication of the Lubbock Temple, and a handful are likely watching today by Zoom. But most await us now beyond the veil. What a reunion that will be. May God be with them and with us until we meet again. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.